following is a local resident producers program. The content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable. The City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi, and welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, one of your hosts, along with former Oshkosh Mayor and former City Councilwoman, yes, Melanie.
Just got
Bloechl.
elected, yes.
Self-appointed. And our guest today is the Winnebago County Sheriff Mike Brooks. He is seeking re-election for yet another term on Tuesday, November 5th. We should point out that he's being challenged by Democratic candidate Bob Hughes. Mr. Hughes was extended an invitation to appear on the program along with Mike. He declined, saying that he would like to appear after the League of Women Voters forum on October 16th. And unfortunately, our taping schedule, our replay schedule, just won't allow that to be airing before the election. So unfortunately, Mr. Hughes will not have his viewpoints represented here.
Maybe next time he won't want to keep his powder quite so dry. If he has something to say, he might want to join Mr. Brooks. Yeah.
Well, anyway, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you for
Sheriff
inviting
Brooks.
me.
Mike.
Thanks for joining us. Why don't we just start with you kind of giving us a little history of, you know, what you are all about, how long you've been here, that type of thing.
Well, I was born in Oshkosh, but actually I grew up in Waterloo, Iowa, in the suburbs of Denver. Moved back here in time to graduate from Oshkosh West High School. Started my adult working career at Winnebago Mental Health. Joined the Sheriff's Office, and as a matter of fact, October 23rd of this month in 1972. I'm married. I have excuse me, my wife Cheryl and I have 4 children, all of which are either in college or out of college at this point. When I started on the Sheriff's Office, I started as a corrections officer. Then I moved on to being a patrol officer, was promoted to a detective. Then I served about a year and a half as a patrol sergeant. Went back into the Detective Bureau as a detective sergeant, was promoted to the lieutenant of detectives, and at that time that ran that division. 93, I was promoted to captain, which was the number 3 position on the department, and the citizens of Winnebago County elected me sheriff in 1994, and I started office in 95. As I said, I graduated from Oshkosh West High School. I have a degree from the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh, political science with an emphasis in criminal justice, and took a lot of classes in public administration. Went to the FBI National Academy, the FBI Leads Program, National Sheriff's Executive Development Seminar, and I've had several specialized classes in homicide investigation, arson investigation, etc.
I'm most impressed with you're an Oshkosh-born person. I mean, I think that's just wonderful. See, we really do have smart people right here in Oshkosh that we can tap our own resources. That's wonderful.
The smartest move is moving back. I guess.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
With this election coming up, Mike, this is the first time that a sheriff in the state will be serving a 4-year elected term as opposed to 2. How did that come about, and why just the sheriff's position?
Well, politics works in very strange ways. Approximately 4 years ago, I'm sure you're aware, there was the vote on Miller Park, and that resulted in a senator from Racine being recalled and losing his position. At that time, the sheriffs and the district attorneys were in the final step of having a referendum put on the ballot to allow a 4-year term for both the sheriffs and the district attorneys. That recall election changed the balance of the Senate in Madison, and ultimately we weren't able to get that brought out of committee for a vote in the Senate. The Assembly had passed it twice, the Senate once, but it required a second one. Long story short, Senator Edelman was given a federal judgeship. He was replaced by a Republican. They brought it out of committee, but they could only get the sheriffs out. It came out in April of '98. And was voted in November of, was on the ballot in November of '98 and passed overwhelmingly. But as of yet, they haven't moved towards moving any of the other positions at the county level.
Yeah, just the sheriff, not the
That's
DA,
right.
not the clerk of courts, the county clerk.
Yeah,
or-
what's the advantage to a 4-year term for a sheriff? Is it just strictly so you're not out campaigning all the time?
Well, actually, I think the real advantage, actually, it works both ways. It's an advantage and a disadvantage. Obviously, a two-year term puts you up in front of the voters more often. But a 2-year term really doesn't allow you to implement any programs and begin to really see them come to fruition. It really does take 4 years in order to do that. And there is a significant difference, I think, between a district attorney and a sheriff in the Register of Deeds from a legislator, and that is that we really aren't legislating. We are department heads that are elected to run a specific department. So I think it gives us a better chance to implement our ideas and allow the voters to get a chance to see whether or not we've accomplished it.
One of the things that I've always wondered about is the viability of continuing to elect a sheriff, where you're a law enforcement officer and the laws are the law. Why have to elect a sheriff anyway? Why not just hire someone who's qualified to do what you do?
Well, I think you can make a good argument either way. I've never understood the partisanship part of it,
Right.
Other than to say that it's a grassroots type of movement, whether it's for the Democratic Party or whether it's for the Republican Party. But I think there's a lot to be said about, first of all, number one, does it need to be elected, and number two, does it need to be partisan? I would suggest that it still is beneficial to the citizens to have it elected. It does give them a much more direct control over the law enforcement services. One of the things I ran on in 1994 was expanding community policing in Winnebago County, setting up more programs where we're partnering with the community, like the Triad program for the seniors. Those types of initiatives, the community has a better chance to say yes, we want them, or no, we don't want them, and they do it through an election process. So I think that's the advantage to having me elected.
That makes sense. Well, I'd like to delve right in, if I might, Cheryl.
Sure, go ahead.
Because you did take office in 1994, this handy-dandy little document that the county puts together, which Mike and I were talking about prior to the show starting, is actually a very easy-to-read document, and I've done budgets for 11 and a half years, and this is really a very thorough and quite easy to read document. When I was reviewing your budget for your department, in 1994 when you took office, the budget for the Sheriff's Department was $8,815,369 with a full-time staff of about 148 full-time sworn officers. There were no part-time officers on staff at that time. In 8 years, that budget has ballooned significantly, which, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that. It has ballooned to $13,389,551, and the staff has also ballooned significantly in those 8 years to 181 full-time sworn officers.
Right.
From 148.
From 148 to 181 in about 8 years. Now, if we look at that increase, it's over a $4 million increase in 8 years, and 47 more employees.
Sure.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I know we've got Huber, I know we've got the jail. Where, there's got to be a cap someplace as to how we can control some of these costs. What can you explain this huge
Sure, I'd be glad
change?
to. First of all, if you take a look in the 1995 budget book, you'll see that it says 148 employees. There was an error in the 1995 budget. They did not include the new employees for the Huber Center that opened up in 1995. So some of that was already there prior to my taking office. They also didn't include the salaries for those 6 people, which comes out with fringe benefits to nearly $500,000.
How can you forget employees in a budget?
Well, and I guess the finance director, when he brought it up at the county board, said, "I'm sorry, I should have put it in there," but he did apologize for it, and and it is on the record that that part of it was his mistake.
So some of these employees were rollovers and made to look like it was reflective of new hires
Sure.
on your watch.
Sure, and they were new hires on my watch, but they were approved beforehand for
Okay.
that Huber Center.
Okay.
Additionally, we've done some other things. For example, we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of calls for service that our patrol had. So I took advantage of the COPS program and hired 3 officers through the COPS program. Additionally, we had to increase our staff up in the main jail because of the increase in the number of inmates that we were dealing with. When I took office and we opened up the new facility, the thought was that we would be somewhere in the low 70s in that new jail once we opened up the new facility. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Really?
We ballooned from 70 in July of '95 when we opened up the new facility to over 100 within about 6 months. So, you know, once again, when you increase your number of inmates by a quarter, you have to hire more staff. Additionally, we created a position, a GIS position, and actually it was not a new position to the table of organization for the county. It was a transfer from the zoning to my office, and it was because it worked very closely with the 911 center. About 4 or 5 years ago, with the Huber Center and our overcrowding starting to begin, we had a lot of empty beds out at that Huber Center. And I went to the county board, I went to my committee of jurisdiction, and I said, look, this doesn't make sense to me to have these empty beds and have to start housing prisoners out of county if I don't have to. I said that right now there are a significant number of the inmates that we have in our jail that we could put out there. Now, we have to remember the Huber Center has a couple restrictions. You have to be sentenced, and you have to be sentenced with Huber. It's a totally unlocked facility, so anybody can walk out at any time. And I said, I'm not comfortable filling that facility up unless I have additional staff to deal with them. They are our problem children because they're not working. They don't have an incentive to follow the rules because they're not working. They're not going to lose their job, and they know we're full here, so we can't take a lot of the disciplinary action against them. Long story short, we ended up hiring 5 more people. We hired 7 people last year as the beginning of the transition for equipping the new facility. Now, the reason we did that is this whole process is a very long planned out process. We started actually in about 1997. But the final phase of the process is called a transition team. We are opening up a totally new facility, and it takes about a year, well, we're anticipating it'll take us about a year in order to write all the rules and regulations and operating procedures for this new facility. Now, I have to tell you, I have to give praise to my staff because Brown County and other counties have taken anywhere from 18 to 24 months to do that. My staff has worked very hard and is doing it in a very short period of time. That's how we've come to grow as far as the number of staff that we have in our department.
Can you just back up a little
Sure.
bit? You talked about taking advantage of the COPS program.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of people who don't understand what the COPS program is. That was during the Clinton administration where monies were made available
Right.
to communities to be able to hire more police officers, more correctional officers, to have people out on the street, and it was an incentive, and they helped us pay for them to a point.
Right.
Okay.
For 3 years, they covered up to 75% of their wages. The interesting side note, though, is you had to make a commitment, number one, that you would keep them on afterwards, but number two, you also had to make a commitment that they would replace officers and become involved in community programs. And I don't mean to stress or get too far away from that, but that's where my opponent and I greatly differ. I am very big on community programs. I think they are essential partnerships with our community if we're going to provide the law enforcement service. I believe the community dictates the type of law enforcement service that they want, and I think it's our responsibility to get out there and work with them. A large part of the community policing, though, is not only looking at, and I hate to use this phrase because I hear the officers say this, it's not running red light and siren. It's when you get there and you say, why did this problem exist? What resources can we bring to bear that are already there that can help eliminate this? How can we prevent things from happening? And that's where my opponent and I greatly differ, is that I'm very big into the DARE program, the GREAT program, which works on gangs. It works on the summer component with kids that are at risk. Where you organize activities and
Sure.
law enforcement works with them instead of allowing them to run free during the summer and get into trouble. The senior program, I'm very big into the triad program.
Triads.
We need to be doing things with our seniors, not only at crime prevention, but quality of life issues, and that's like the file of life type thing. To go back to your other question, though, if I just finish up on the dollar amounts,
Sure.
about 85% of my budget is labor.
Sure.
And if you take a look at my labor budget, it has grown, as everyone has, and that is where you will see a significant increase in my budget. That is the major difference between 1995 and today. But if you take a look at also in the 1996 budget, the first budget I really got to do myself, by just doing some simple cost analysis, some different purchasing, I reduced the categories of capital, travel, and other expenses by $108,000. I've worked all along to reduce my budget as much as I can. I've partnered with the private sector. Aramark we brought in to do the meals. It was projected the first year $600,000 was what we would have spent with Parkview to feed the inmates. We ended up spending $374,000 that first year, and we're going to be about $350,000 less than the figure that we would have had to pay to Parkview. So just in those 2 years, we saved nearly $700,000. I went out when our inmate phone system was going to be need to be replaced and the contract renewed. I worked with Evercom, and we signed a contract with them. I worked the best deal I could get for them. We got a $20,000 signing bonus, and we expect to realize in revenues somewhere in excess of $75,000 more than what we did previously. I cut a very unpopular thing within my department. I cut a position of a dispatcher at the front desk. And that position, basically what it boiled down to is if you called the Winnebago County Sheriff's Officer, that dispatcher would answer that call, and you said, I want to speak to Sheriff Brooks. She would transfer you to my office. Now, if I'm in my office, I pick up the phone. If I'm not in my office, you get my voicemail. Okay? That position, we figured was going to be about $62,000 a year in cost. The following year, after we cut that position out, we saved $93,000 in overtime.
Wow.
$93,000.
From a singular position?
From a singular position. Because of the staffing, we ended up having to fill that the vast majority of the time with overtime. It's things like that that I have done all along. I can point to a county in the Fox Valley here, a law enforcement agency, a sheriff's office with approximately the same number of staff, communities just slightly larger. Their overtime comes to nearly $1 million a year. Mine comes to about $513,000.
Well, actually, we have your overtime here, and it's actually less than that.
I'm sorry, what I budgeted. That's what I budgeted, I should say.
Yeah, it's actually less than that, so that's good news for you. But I have two quick comments on some of the things that you said. You stated that your opponent and yourself differ in the community aspects of your positions, that you're very much a community proponent.
Right.
And getting out there and being in and amongst the people.
Right.
I noticed that in your budget you have cut the chaplain program, and I'm wondering why the funding for that has been significantly decreased, especially with the teen suicide. I mean, they were kind of the intervention people, were they not, for teen suicide? And
not our chaplain program. Our chaplain program functions if there's a traffic fatality, a suicide, etc. They accompany the officer, or they meet the officer to deal with the family. Our chaplain program really did not see a cut because we never had that as a line item in our budget. It comes out of the training area of our budget. We provide them with a squad car. We provide them with a telephone so they can make the necessary phone calls when they're administering to the victims of the family of the victims. So we really haven't cut that. Where you're seeing a involvement with teens suicides really comes more from our corner, to be quite frank with you. He is working with a group. They meet at Aurora Health Center once a month, and they are trying to get programs set up to deal with the teen suicide problem. Now, I have been asked to be a member of that committee, and have told them that, look, right now with the jail issue, with the campaign and everything, I need to take a breather here for a couple months, and if I'm reelected, I'll join into the program. If not, I would encourage my opponent, if he wins, to join in. Our youth, whether it be through the Boys and Girls Club, whether it be through the GRADE program, the DARE program, we really need to recognize we have to start looking at children at risk, whether it is to be at risk for suicide or whether it's to be at risk for becoming involved in criminal activity. We need to be catching that when they're much younger than when they are now.
One other thing, and just
Sure.
I just want to, I apologize,
Yeah.
Cheryl, I promise not to monopolize. In USA Today, which I don't normally read, I found it, because I found this interesting because I knew that you were going to be a guest and you were so gracious about accepting our invitation very early on. There was a debate in the paper on positions of pro and con. How do you feel about continued incarceration for nonviolent drug offenders versus finding other alternatives to free up some of the jails? Are there other things that we can do? And it was a very interesting debate. And as a conservative, I found myself finding benefits in both sets of arguments. As you're running as a Republican, I think that you probably have a very conservative background.
Yes.
You know, what is your position on something like that, the continued incarceration and
Sure.
the way that we've handled things to this point?
Well, I'll try and not, one of my biggest problems is I always start getting too much into the minutia of things, and I'll try and not do that.
You only have a half an hour, and I cut Cheryl off twice now. She's going to kick me.
And every one of these questions, I could go more than a half hour.
Sure.
I am very much in favor of looking at alternatives to incarceration. Now, with that, let me say this. People need to be held accountable for their actions, but there's more than one way to hold them accountable. There are people that need to go to jail, and those people should go to jail. But there are people that have committed a crime, or after a period of time in jail, are serving time for maybe a crime that would allow us to, after, say, 2 months or 3 months, say there is an alternative. We cannot continue to build jails. I mean, it's just that simple. We need to start looking at other ways of dealing with that, and that's one of, to me, that's what this race should be focusing on. What are we going to do January of 2003? Not the jail, as my opponent is trying to make the argument
It's
over.
done.
It's not only done, but in actuality, it saves the taxpayers' dollars over the next 10 years, and it also gets us out of the predicament we'd be in 10 years from now if we didn't do that. So, you know, from my perspective, we ought to be saying, what are we going to do? I got involved with the 3 counties of Winnebago, Outagamie, and Calumet to look at alternatives to incarceration. We need to look at different ways of handling people so that it doesn't cost us an arm and a leg. One of them I implemented quite some time ago, last February, and that is the GPS program. It's an electronic monitoring, but it allows us, through using the GPS, which is a latitude and longitude system, I can at any time say, where is inmate A, where is inmate B. I can program in there that if he's not supposed if he's supposed to go from point A to point B, and he decides he wants to go to point C first, we get alerted. I feel comfortable with certain people being on that and saving us tax dollars. It costs that inmate $11.50, it costs that inmate $18 a day. We pay $11.50 for it. The remainder goes to help offset the cost of the staff to do that. I'm proposing that we should be looking at that type of program, and we should be joining together with Outagamie and Calumet County to say, how can we deal with alternatives to incarceration? Those are the types of issues. I don't believe we can continue to build jails.
You know, you brought up some of the basic differences between you and your opponent. Now, one of the things Mr. Hughes has accused you of is poor planning, specifically with respect to the jail. He claims that it costs less to house prisoners out of the county than it does to house them in the county.
Sure.
Is that true? I mean, in my own mind, I'm trying to figure out how that would be possible.
It's not true. What he did was, first of all, if he's making that claim, then he's changed from his original position. What he's doing is he's taking the per diem cost minus what it costs us to house the prisoner out of county. And
Explain per diem cost.
Oh, I'm sorry. The per diem cost is what do I pay Washoe County when I'm housing a prisoner there per day. And he's saying we're only paying $6 a day. And that's true. In the per diem cost, we're only paying $6 a day. But if you take a look at the study that was presented to the board, it said they were really given 2 options. And let's make this very clear, by the way. I'm not the one that authorized this. Now, I will tell you that as a taxpayer first and as the sheriff second, when I took a look at the study, I became even more convinced that we needed to build a jail. And what they were given was, here's the cost for housing out of the county, here's the cost for operating the jail. And over a 10-year period, that was going to be $11 million more. And in 2013, we would be sitting here, if we were housing prisoners out of county, we would be sitting here without a jail. We would have the jails that we're using that are 45, 50 miles away, We would have them filled with their prisoners, and we'd start looking at prisoners, or excuse me, at jails even further out.
Sure.
So, you know, the per diem is only a part of the cost. Another part of the cost is the staff that is necessary to transport those prisoners back and forth every day because they have to go to court. It's the cost of public defenders to go back and forth. It's the cost of probation officers to go back and forth. It's the cost of medical. We have an infrastructure here that allows us to provide the mandated medical care that we have to give a prisoner, and we can do it much cheaper than if I have them in Washoe County and they have to send them to a doctor in the community. There's a lot of hidden costs. That's why it was $11 million more. And the other, you know, the other thing about this, I guess, you know, I'd like to ask my opponent, where were you 4 years ago or even 2 years ago when this was really coming in front of the county board? If this was such a burning issue from your perspective, why didn't you come forward and run for sheriff then?
Your department has pretty much all sworn officers. Is that
127 out of the 181.
okay? Since officers can't legally carry guns in a prison, would we not be able to perhaps save some costs if they weren't necessarily sworn officers? I mean, what's the advantage to having a sworn officer?
Well, the real advantage of the sworn officer is with all the activities that we have during the summer with EAA, Ducks Unlimited, Country USA, I'm able to use those officers, the boat program, the snowmobile program, I'm able to use those officers to help fill in, to work the boat and to work at EAA, et cetera, et cetera. The reason that becomes important is if I didn't have them there, I'd need to have more officers over in the patrol area. Basically, what we're able to do is by having them sworn, we're able to utilize them in more than one capacity. Now, the real big difference is whether they're protective or not protective, because that has to do with the Wisconsin retirement system.
Right, the pensions.
Our Winnebago County Professional Police Association won protective status back in 1973. So they are protected status, and from when you couple that with the fact that we're able to use them for multiple reasons and multiple purposes, it makes only good sense to do that. If I could go back, one of the things you said is that poor planning on this jail. We planned this.
Well, he said it. I didn't.
No. Yeah, I'm sorry. But I've wanted to say to the community, you know, anything but poor planning. We beat this thing to death. If you really take a look, this goes back to Sheriff Terry Foote in the 80s. Mm-hmm. It goes back to Sheriff Burton, to Sheriff Krause, and in 1993. We said we're going to build a Huber Center, and that'll take care of all of our needs. Well, the reality of it is, I said to them at that time, we're not only growing and working prisoners, we're growing in probation holds, and we're growing in pre-sentence detainees. And I was right. We tried a very simple solution to a complex problem, and now we're revisiting that problem. So there's been a lot of planning done on this. I was a part of a task force that was comprised of consultants to look at the possible solutions, and to say that we didn't plan, I think, is really a misstatement to the community.
We have about 60 seconds left,
Okay.
so in a minute,
This has been very...
we had so many
Yeah.
questions, we
Sure.
should have gone on for probably 2 more hours.
Yeah.
In about 60 seconds, why don't you just explain to us where you see your department going if you're reelected, or better yet, tell the people why they should vote for you on November 5th.
I think both of them are the same thing. I see the department continuing to look for ways to accomplish the job at a lower cost. I have always looked for ways to provide the service and decrease the cost, and I've done that consistently over the last 8 years through some of the ideas and programs I've implemented. I've saved the taxpayers, and I'm one of them. I've saved us over $2 million in operational costs. It's that type of management style that you need. Contrary to what my opponent is saying, I'm not a big spender. I'm just the opposite. When it comes to something we have to buy, I try and find the most economical way to purchase it and the most economical way to run it. And if he would take a look at what we're doing in the jail, that's a classic example. If he would take a look at the meals, that's a classic example. If you take a look at my cutting out one position and saving $93,000 in the first year, and by the way, we did that 4 years ago. If you take a look at some of the staffing issues that we've made adjustments on, as I said, it comes up to over $2 million. I will be the same type of fiscal responsible manager that I have been for the last 8 years, and I'll look at ways that will save the taxpayers money down the line, yet at the same time give them the quality services they have the right to expect.
I want to ask one last
Sure.
question and let you wrap up,
Okay.
because I know Cheryl's got to hang up. If you could use one word to describe your strongest trait, what would that be?
Leadership.
Okay, great.
Been great.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us at home, and tune in next time when our guest will be Democratic candidate for the 54th Assembly District, Jim Genesio. Hopefully, incumbent Greg Underheim will be able to join us as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Keep your eye on us because we've got our eye on Oshkosh. Take care. Bye.
Wait,